my father's parents. They lived in the central part of Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, most of the time. We used to see them when I was little twice a year. They would come down at Christmas, and we would go to Port Arthur, and we would go up to Sedalia in the summertime. And when they came down for Christmas, that was always really exciting. They would come down the train because my grandfather, who we called Mepaw, Mepaw was a railroad man, and he was a carpenter. And so you don't think of carpenters as working for the railroad, but boxcars back then were all wood. And so, there was a lot of the train cars and such. And I guess, I don't know what all he did for the railroad as a carpenter, but he was a carpenter. He worked for a couple of railroads over the years. One of the reasons he worked for a couple of railroads over the years is because he caused a train wreck. And when you cause a train wreck, you're automatically fired for 5 years. And so at the end of the 5 years, he went back. And the way he caused the train wreck, he was 5 miles out of town, and he looked at his watch, and there was 5 minutes before the next train was going to leave. And he was on one of these little one-man cars, and it would go 60 miles an hour. And so he hopped on that car to get into town and get off the main track. And about a mile, his watch was off. And so about a mile outside of town, he saw the train coming. And so he slowed his car. I mean, he was going 60 miles an hour. And this thing wasn't like instant stop. And of course, the train has a long time to stop. And so he started slowing his car down as much as he could. And then right before it hit the train, he jumped off the car onto the side and rolled. And he was fine, but he caused the train wreck and got fired for that. But then at the end of 5 years, he must have been a pretty good guy because they hired him back as soon as they could. And he eventually retired. Mepaw was also a buyer and seller. He was a wheeler dealer. He was a trader. He would go to an estate sale, and he'd buy this box of that and this other thing. And then he'd load them up in his car, whatever he got. And then on the way home, he would stop at places that he knew sold secondhand stuff and make at least as much money back, maybe more, before he got home with whatever was left over. And whatever was left over went down into his basement. And there was all kinds of things in his house. It was really lots of fun as a kid to go and explore the basement and explore the attic. And that was a lot of fun. Memaw always was sickly, as I remember. She was as sickly as a mother. She had, I think, a lot of bladder kind of problems and different things. I don't know what else she had, but Mepaw the doctor would take labor for the money, so he worked for the doctor quite a bit to pay for Memaw's medical care. Memaw was always very sweet, very loving, and she would save her change in a coin purse. And when we would get to Memaw's house, then not necessarily the first night, but pretty early in the visit, Memaw would come and say, "Okay, boys, here's something for you to divide." And if we had enough money, if Uncle Harold, if HW and I, my brother HW and I, had enough money to buy whatever we needed to buy to get to Memaw and Mepaw's for the trip up, which was about a 14-hour drive, then she gave us the money to buy our snacks and such and souvenirs on the way back, because I don't know, we may have each gotten $5 or $7 or $10 or $12, and that's a lot of money. That was a lot of money when the normal labor rate for workers was like $1 an hour. So $5 would be a big chunk of money back then, and 10 would be like even incredible. So we would split that. I'd divide up all the coins and split it up. And that's why one time with my grandkids, with the Knowles, I did that to have them go through the money and count the money and divide it out. So lots of fun. And Memaw always used to have treasure hunts. So she would get different kind of things for us. I don't know if it would be like a candy, treat, a little toy, whatever items that she would find over the time. And then they would hide them in the house, like in the living room. And so there might be one up on top of the drapes and another over underneath a cabinet or something. So You know, and Memaw would always do that, and that was lots of fun. She loved to do that. The creamery there in Sedalia, that Mepaw used to love to take us over to get ice cream there. My dad had packed ice cream as a boy and done delivery for the dairy, and they had this. They sold ice cream, a nickel a scoop. It was like wonderful, and I used to love the chocolate almond was my favorite. And I remember towards the end of the times we were going there, they went up to 10 cents for the first scoop and 5 cents for each additional scoop, which is like, okay. And I liked the chocolate almond, and then they would do it, you know, maybe they did as much as 3 scoops. And I said, well, can I get more than 3? They said, well, yeah, if you can handle it. I said, well, then I got 4, and then the next time I got 5. And then the last time on that trip that we went there, I got 6 scoops of chocolate almond, and I ate every bit of it and didn't let it fall. So anyway, Memaw would always like the lemon freeze, so they'd bring home some lemon freeze for her. I don't remember what we brought home for my mom, but she never went with us. It was always my dad, Mepaw, and HW and I. Mepaw was a very, very hard worker. In fact, you know, a little bit of the times he was just a laborer. So, I mean, he's a carpenter, he's a skilled laborer, but he was still just a laborer. And so they heated their house with wood. And so to get the wood, he would go out to someone's land who had wooded area, and he would cut wood, cut 4 cords of wood, and the owner of the land would get 2 cords of the wood and, you know, cut it into cord length. And the owner of the land would get 2 cords of wood, and then he would get 2 cords of wood, but he didn't have a horse and wagon. So he would go arrange with someone in town to come out, or at least he didn't have anything that would carry the wood. That was a substantial wagon. And arrange with someone to come out, and they would load the wood on the wagon, go to his house. He would get 1 cord of wood, and then the owner of the wagon got a cord of the wood. They got halves for hauling. And so to heat their house, he would have to cut 4 cords of wood to get 1 for heating his house. And it probably, based on Grandma Bird's experience, it probably took 4 or 5 cords of wood to heat the house for the winter. So he had to do a lot of wood cutting in the summertime and in the spring to be able to do that, in addition to his regular job.
He would always do odd jobs, right? Like
he would do anything. He would paint somebody's house. He would do some carpentry work, and so he was painting. I don't know if he was painting the whole house or painting the trim on the house, but he was stepping down off the ladder at the end of the day, toward the end, and he misjudged the bottom rung. He thought the ground was below, and it wasn't. He was a second rung up, and he stepped and he landed on both heels. And when he did, his heels hurt quite a bit. But he went ahead and cleaned up his stuff there, and finished what he was doing for the day. It was at the end of the day, and he drove himself to the hospital or the doctor, I don't know which, had himself checked, and both of his heels were broken. And so he was told that he would never walk again, that he...
and how old was he at this point?
You know, I'm thinking he was in his 70s at the time. And that it was on my birthday, if I remember right. It was on September 11th that happened. He was determined to not be bedridden. And so he was up, you know, in due time, and I'm sure less than a year later, he was out walking without a cane. He wasn't going to let that slow him down. In fact, for him, his greatest fear was being bedridden. He hated the nursing homes. He'd always comment about how bad they were. And my dad said later, he said he thought that was part of his fear of getting down to where he couldn't get up, couldn't work, couldn't take care of Daisy, of Memaw. He would, you know, in the later years, he was get to where he would just shuffle very, very slowly. And the pharmacist, who was Dad just 2 blocks down the street, was friends with Dad, and was saying that I was ready to call you. And he was walking a little bit better, and he's slow. And so finally, I don't remember what happened. I think he had a stroke. He was down
And then we went up to the house in summertime, the summer of 1970. Mepaw was in the hospital, and Memaw, the doctor put her in the hospital so that she was out of the house, and then they cleared the house out, and they sold the house and moved. Boy, was there stuff in the basement of that place. There was all kinds of stuff. And the basement was full, the attic was full, and we took out all the things that was special or whatever they wanted, and then they had someone do an estate sale. And one of the things I got from it was a Stetson, a genuine Stetson felt hat. And I wore that felt hat swimming and in the beach surfing, and I would go fall down, and if I'd fall down, I'd put my hand on my hat to keep it and come back up. And somewhere there's old pictures of me wearing this old floppy, water, wilted, not having the perfect, Stetson hat, but it was great. It was a great summer, sun hat for me for a long time. Moved them too. They got laid on their back in an ambulance beside each other, and they rode on their backs down to Port Arthur, and were put in a nursing home together. And very shortly after they got there, Memaw died. I was out of town. I was at a summer science program at the University of Idaho. Of course, they were down in Port Arthur, and I didn't go back for the funeral, for Memaw's funeral. But then Mepaw was alone, and that was really hard for him. And he was alone and in bed and didn't want to do anything. And finally they said, well, you need to get up in a wheelchair. He said, well, I don't want to get in a wheelchair. I can't do anything. They said, that's okay. You can just sit in the wheelchair. And they put him in the wheelchair. Of course, one side of his body was weak. And with one hand and one foot, he ended up in the sunroom talking to other people. And so he would be there talking to other people. And then as soon as my dad would come, or I would come with my dad or mom, he was like, oh, this place is terrible. Oh. But I think he did a lot of talking when we weren't there. Memaw loved dahlias. She just thought dahlias were the most beautiful flower, and Mepaw every year would plant in an arbor. There was a grape arbor area that they didn't do much with the grapes, but back in that area on the side there was a flower bed that they did for their dahlias, and so he would plant dahlias there, and while he was active, he always planted a garden, tomatoes and other kind of things. So he had a garden. One year he had strawberries, maybe a 200 by 200 foot area, 150 by 100 foot. I mean, it was a big area, right? So maybe even 100 by 100 foot square. But it's big enough that he could pick the strawberries and sell them. And I was maybe 3, maybe 4. And I remember picking strawberries, and I remember picking them and eating and picking and eating. And I had maybe half a pint. And I was worn out. And so I came up to where they were putting the strawberries and said, I have strawberries. And Mepaw says, oh, you've picked so many. You've been working hard? Yeah. He says, well, what do you think you've earned? And I said, well, how about 4 bits? And for those of you who are not familiar with the archaic bits, 2 bits is 25 cents. And so that was 50 cents. That was like half an hour of an adult pay. So it'd be like saying $5, for the half a pint of strawberries. And he paid me. And I felt so good that he paid me for picking those strawberries, And they would always do special things. They would always do something, try to do something very special for HW and I. They were really, 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 really happy when we came, and always expressed their sadness when we left. And I think that was a little bit to my dad's consternation, that we know that you'd rather be with us, but we have to go home. It's inevitable, right? So hearing how sad they're going to miss us didn't really help a lot to him.